The silence in the courtroom was so complete you could hear the courtroom clock ticking, each second a hammer strike against glass. Valentina Harper sat alone at the defendant table, her left eye swollen shut, the skin around it a deep purple-black that spread like a bruise across her entire cheekbone. Fingerprint bruises wrapped around her throat in a perfect handprint. Someone had tried to choke the life out of her, and they had nearly succeeded. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. $2. That was all the money in her pocket. $2 to her name. Robert Hargrove sat 3 rows back, a thin man with slicked hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. His nephew had done the beating, but Robert had orchestrated everything else: the manufactured debt, the court date, the public humiliation. Next to him sat Evelyn Blackwell, a woman in a cream designer suit that cost more than Valentina's entire monthly salary. Evelyn's fingernails were lacquered a blood red. Her eyes held the particular cruelty of someone who had never been told no, never been made uncomfortable, never had to account for the destruction she caused. She whispered something to her attorney, and both of them smiled. The judge was finishing his statement about wage garnishment when the courtroom doors slammed open with the force of thunder. Every head turned. Giovanni Russo walked through those doors like he owned the building, because in many ways, he did. 6'3". Black suit tailored to fit his broad shoulders like skin. Dark hair silvered at the temples. A scar ran from the outer corner of his left eye down to his cheekbone, the kind of scar that came from a blade, not an accident. His eyes were storm gray and absolutely devoid of emotion as he surveyed the room. Vinny and Sal flanked him, both men in identical black suits, both carrying themselves with the particular confidence of people who had never once doubted their own authority. The bailiff's hand moved toward his weapon. Then froze. Something in Giovanni's expression suggested that gesture would be the last decision the bailiff ever made. Giovanni walked directly to the defendant table. Sat down beside Valentina without asking permission. His cologne smelled like expensive leather and something darker, like a winter night that had turned violent. Up close, his scars were even more pronounced, a map of a life lived in shadows. "Your Honor," Giovanni said, and his voice was deep and solid like an oath, like thunder contained in human form. "I am here to settle Miss Harper's account in full and to provide legal representation for all remaining proceedings. Every charge against her will be withdrawn immediately, or we will be forced to discuss my involvement in this courtroom's licensing review." Robert Hargrove's smirk vanished like snow under a blowtorch. Evelyn Blackwell's face drained of color. Her attorney began frantically shuffling papers. The judge's jaw tightened. "Mr. Russo, I do not believe you have standing in this case." "I have every standing," Giovanni said quietly. "This woman is under my protection. That protection is not negotiable." Valentina sat frozen. She did not move. She did not even breathe. This man was a complete stranger. She had never seen him before in her life. Yet he was sitting beside her as if they had known each other for years, as if her survival mattered to him in some fundamental, non-negotiable way. His hand rested on the table, and she noticed a thick gold wedding band on his ring finger and a diamond-studded watch that probably cost more than her entire life's earnings. "The charges are withdrawn," the judge said quietly. "Case dismissed." It took 45 seconds. 45 seconds for everything to change. 45 seconds for Valentina Harper to go from standing alone in a courtroom facing financial ruin to sitting beside a man whose name whispered through Miami's underworld like a curse. 45 seconds for Robert Hargrove to understand that he had made a catastrophic mistake. But what Valentina did not know, what no one in that courtroom could have known, was that 72 hours earlier, this man had experienced something that shifted the axis of his entire world. 72 hours earlier, his daughter had been found half-drowned in a storm drain at 3 in the morning, calling for help, and a waitress with $2 in her pocket had pulled the child to safety without hesitation, without asking who the child belonged to, without expecting anything in return. Giovanni Russo had raised his hand and pulled back the floodgates of heaven itself. As they stood to leave the courtroom, Valentina finally found her voice. It came out barely a whisper, like a candle in the wind that was about to be extinguished. "Thank you," she said. I do not know why you did that, but thank you. Giovanni looked at her bruised face, her swollen eye, the fingerprint bruises on her throat. His eyes went cold and dark and absolutely lethal. Because the people who did this believed you were nobody, he said. And that belief needs to be corrected. The courtroom doors closed behind them. The August heat hit like a wall, thick and suffocating, the kind of Miami humidity that made the air itself feel solid. A black SUV pulled to the curb with precision, the engine humming like a sleeping predator. Vinny opened the door. Giovanni guided Valentina inside with a hand on the small of her back, treating her like she was made of glass. As the SUV pulled into traffic, Miami's skyline glittered behind them like a promise that had not yet been kept. Valentina pressed her forehead against the window. Outside, the city moved in fast forward, palm trees, neon signs, homeless encampments next to luxury condos. This was her Miami. This was the world she had been fighting in for the last 4 years. And in the space of 45 minutes, everything had changed. But to understand how she had gotten here, to comprehend the chain of events that had led to this moment, you had to go back. Back to the humid August night, 12 days earlier, when a 7-year-old girl went missing from her bedroom. Back to the night that Valentina Harper pulled a child from a storm drain and unknowingly pulled the most dangerous man in South Florida back toward his own humanity. Back to the beginning. 72 hours before the courtroom, Valentina was working her third double shift of the week at Martina's Diner on Calle Oco, a chrome and neon establishment that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. The clock above the register read 3:53 in the morning. She had been on her feet for 16 hours. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her feet were blistered inside shoes held together with electrical tape. But she kept moving. She had to. She carried a tray of 4 coffees to a table in the corner where 3 men in suits sat counting money. They did not look up as she served them. One of them, a man with a gold tooth and dead eyes, grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. "You know what your problem is," he said. His breath smelled like whiskey and cigarettes. "No," Valentina said, every muscle in her body going rigid. "You are not grateful enough." His fingers tightened around her wrist. "You should be grateful people even look at you." Valentina pulled her arm free and walked back to the kitchen. Her hand trembled as she gripped the edge of the counter. Rosa, the night cook, was smoking a cigarette she was not supposed to be smoking. "Those animals," Rosa said, not looking away from the grill. "Always," Valentina said. "You should have stabbed him with the coffee pot." "I need this job." Rosa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "We all need this job. That is how they keep us here." 3 blocks away, in a mansion that occupied an entire city block, a 7-year-old girl named Lily Russo lay in bed unable to sleep. The house was so quiet it felt like being inside a tomb. Her father had not been home in 3 days. Her nanny slept in the room next door, but Lily had learned long ago that nannies came and went, that adults were unreliable, that the only person she could depend on was herself. She stared at the ceiling and counted the cracks in the plaster. 47. There were 47 cracks. Outside, the August night was hot and breathless. The air conditioning hummed. The security system blinked red lights in the darkness. Lily got out of bed. She walked downstairs in her pink pajamas, her bare feet cold against the marble floor. The front door was not locked, the guards outside would not let anyone in anyway. She walked out into the Miami night, following some instinct she did not understand, drawn by something she could not name toward the storm drain 2 blocks away where she had hidden a toy weeks earlier. She found the storm drain. She found the toy. But as she reached down into the dark water to retrieve it, her foot slipped on the wet concrete. She fell. The water was deeper than she expected. The current was stronger. The darkness was so complete that she forgot how to call for help. Instead, she did what small children do when they are drowning. She called for the one person she had always wanted but never had. "Mommy," she screamed into the darkness. "Mommy, please help." Valentina was walking home from work at 3:22 in the morning. She cut through neighborhoods she should not have cut through. The streets were empty except for a man sleeping in a cardboard box and a woman selling something from the shadows. This was her route every night. This was the only way to get from the diner to the converted closet she rented for $320 a month. That is when she heard it. A child's scream. Small. Terrified. Alone. Valentina ran toward the sound. Her exhausted body moved on pure instinct. She found the storm drain and saw the water moving fast, carrying something pink, a child's pajamas, toward the iron grate that would crush her. Valentina did not hesitate. She did not calculate the danger. She did not think about anything at all. She simply dropped into the storm drain, grabbed the child, and pulled her up and out into the humid August air. The little girl was coughing, gasping, her lips already turning blue from the cold water. Valentina held her close and let the child cry against her chest. "You are safe now," Valentina whispered. "You are safe. I have you. I have you." The child's eyes went wide. "Who are you?" "Someone who heard you," Valentina said. "Someone who came." She carried the girl to the nearest hospital, her own clothes soaked, her own teeth chattering from the cold. At the emergency room, doctors swarmed. Security guards appeared. And then men in black suits started arriving, appearing from the darkness like ghosts materializing from smoke. One of them approached Valentina as she sat in the waiting room still dripping wet. "What is your name?" he asked. He was tall, with kind eyes that seemed out of place in a face that suggested he had done terrible things. "Valentina Harper." "Valentina, I am Marco Russo. You saved the life of a very important person tonight. A very important child." He paused. "That child is the daughter of Giovanni Russo." Valentina's blood went cold. Even people who lived in converted closets and worked for $320 a month knew the name Giovanni Russo. Everyone in Miami knew that name. "I did not know," she whispered. "I believe you," Marco said. "That is why you are still alive." 72 hours later, in the courtroom, Giovanni Russo would sit beside this woman and declare her under his protection. But in this moment, in the hospital waiting room at 4 a.m, he stood in his daughter's hospital room and looked at her small face and felt something he thought he had lost forever, a reason to believe that goodness still existed in the world. His daughter had called for a mother. Instead, a stranger had answered. That stranger had to be protected. That was the code. Before we continue, drop a like if this story is hitting you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. We are about to show you exactly what Giovanni Russo does to people who hurt the woman who saved his daughter. Now let us move forward. 12 days. That was all the time Valentina Harper had left before everything disappeared. She stood in the kitchen of the Brickell penthouse at 11:47 in the evening, her hands moving through the motions of closing up for the night, rinsing dishes, wiping the marble countertops that cost more than her annual salary, checking that 7-year-old Lily Chen was asleep in her bed down the hallway. The penthouse hung 42 stories above Miami, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the glittering sprawl of the city, and Valentina existed in none of it. She moved through these rooms like a ghost, present but invisible, her converted closet bedroom, 4 feet wide, wedged between a water heater and stacked storage bins, her only claim to space in this world of luxury. $340 a week. Every single penny went to Robert Hargrove. She pulled her work phone from her pocket. 11:49. The Chens would be back from their evening at the art gallery by midnight. She had 7 minutes to disappear into her closet, set her alarm for 5:30 in the morning, and prepare to do this all over again tomorrow. 16-hour days blurred into one another, a rhythm as predictable as breathing, and just as necessary to survival. But survival was not enough anymore. Valentina moved through the penthouse toward the service entrance, down the back stairs that staff were meant to use, past the gleaming lobby with its waterfall feature and its doorman who never quite looked at her directly. Outside, the August night pressed against her skin like a living thing. The air was thick enough to taste, humid and heavy, carrying the metallic scent of rain coming. Distant thunder rumbled over Brickell, a sound like furniture being dragged across the floor of heaven. She walked 6 blocks to the bus stop, her uniform still clinging to her body, her hair pulled back in the same practical bun she had worn since 5 in the morning. The streets were emptying out, the professional crowd retreating to their condos, the night shift people beginning to emerge. She passed a closed bodega, a laundromat with its light still burning, a parking garage with its security gate coming down like the mouth of a sleeping animal. Then she heard it. A sound so thin and desperate that at first she thought it was the wind. A child's voice. Valentina stopped walking. The sound was coming from the storm drain on Canal Street, that black metal grate that sat flush with the sidewalk, water rushing beneath it through the underground channels that ran beneath the entire city. She moved toward it, drawn by something that had no name in her vocabulary, something that overrode the exhaustion in her bones and the fear that lived permanently in her chest. She knelt beside the grate. Below, in water that was rising with the incoming rain, a small girl in a pink dress clung to the metal rungs of an access ladder. She was perhaps 7 years old, her dark hair plastered to her face, blood running down her knee where she had scraped it on the concrete, her eyes wide and unblinking with terror. "Help me," the child gasped. "Please help me. I cannot breathe." Valentina did not think. Thought would have reminded her that she had $2 in her pocket, that she was already drowning in debt, that helping anyone else was a luxury she could not afford. But her hands were already moving, already gripping the metal grate, already pulling with a strength born from desperation and something else, something that lived in the space where a person's conscience still flickered. The grate did not move. She pulled again, her fingers sliding on the wet metal, finding edges that cut into her palms. Blood mixed with rainwater. The grate began to shift, groaning, and she pulled harder, legs braced against the sidewalk, every muscle screaming. It lifted. Valentina dropped down into the water, which came up to her waist, shockingly cold, carrying the smell of rust and rot and the city's hidden veins. The child reached for her immediately, small arms wrapping around her neck with the desperation of the drowning. Valentina turned, positioned the girl on her shoulders, and pushed upward with her legs, the water fighting against her, pulling downward with the weight of gravity and inevitability. A man's voice. Above her. What in God's name? Hands reaching down, grabbing, pulling the child up through the opening. The girl's weight lifted from Valentina's shoulders. She heard crying, heard the man speaking urgently into a radio, heard the sound of a siren beginning in the distance. She pulled herself up through the grate, soaking wet, her hands leaving blood on the metal. The security guard, older, with a weathered face and eyes that had seen everything, wrapped the child in his jacket, his radio crackling with dispatch codes. "Are you hurt?" he asked Valentina. She shook her head. Her hands were shaking. Water dripped from her uniform. The child, Lily, her name was Lily, the security guard was calling her Lily, clung to him but kept looking back at Valentina. "You saved me," Lily said, her voice small and precise. "You saved me. I fell. I did not know how to climb back up. I could not breathe. You saved me." "What is your name?" the security guard asked Valentina. "Valentina Harper." He wrote it down on a pad he pulled from his pocket. Police cars arrived within 4 minutes. An ambulance within 6. Officers asked her questions while the paramedics examined Lily, while the child kept reaching for Valentina's hand and squeezing it like an anchor to something solid. An officer took her statement. Where did she work? What was she doing in the area? Had she seen anything unusual? She answered in the mechanical voice of someone who had learned not to draw attention to herself, who had learned to be as invisible as possible. She never asked the child's last name. Never thought to ask. The child was safe. That was the entire universe of her concern. At 1:30 in the morning, Valentina boarded the bus that would carry her back to the converted closet, back to the $2 bill in her pocket and the 12 days remaining before Robert Hargrove came to collect his money, or collect something far more valuable. She was still shivering when she climbed into her narrow bed, still tasting the rank water of the storm drain on her tongue, still feeling the ghost weight of the small girl's arms around her neck. She did not know that at that exact moment, in an estate in Coral Gables, a man named Giovanni Russo was receiving a phone call from his head of security. She did not know that Giovanni Russo had lost a daughter once, 9 years ago, a daughter who lived for 3 days and then stopped breathing, whose nursery had been sealed since that morning, whose tiny clothes still hung in a closet that no one was permitted to enter, whose name, Isabella, he had not spoken aloud since the funeral because speaking it required a kind of strength he did not possess. She did not know that when Giovanni Russo heard that his daughter Lily had been found safe, that a woman had pulled her from a flooded storm drain, that his daughter had clung to this stranger and called her a savior, something shifted in the geography of his heart. He sat in his study, the walls lined with books he did not read, photographs he did not look at, the weight of his empire pressing down on his shoulders like a stone that had been there so long he had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. His Lieutenant Vinny stood by the door, waiting for orders. "Find out everything about Valentina Harper," Giovanni said. His voice was quiet. That was how you knew it carried weight. Where she lives. Who she works for. Who she owes money to. Everything. "Yes, sir," Vinny said. Giovanni sat in the darkness of his study and thought about the woman who had answered when his daughter called for help. He thought about the choice she had made in that moment, to risk herself for a stranger's child, to dive into contaminated water, to pull that grate with bare hands until they bled. He thought about the kind of person who did that. And for the first time since his daughter Isabella died, Giovanni Russo felt something other than the carefully managed darkness that ran through his veins like a parallel bloodstream. He felt hope. The rain came heavier as midnight turned to 1 o'clock turned to 2. It drummed against the windows of the penthouse where Valentina would return in just a few hours to make breakfast for the Chen family, drumming against the windows of the Russo estate where Giovanni stood on a balcony and watched the water fall from the sky, drumming against the hospital room where Lily slept under observation, her small face peaceful, her terror forgotten. 12 days remained on Valentina's countdown. She did not know that those 12 days were about to change everything. She did not know that the man whose daughter she saved would move mountains. She did not know that the debt that crushed her was about to become the least of her problems. The checkered floor of Lucky's diner gleamed under flickering neon, each square a tiny mirror reflecting the harsh blue-white light buzzing overhead. 3:22 in the morning. The place was nearly empty, a drunk in a corner booth, a trucker nursing black coffee, and the waitress behind the counter reading a magazine she had memorized weeks ago. Then the door opened, and Giovanni Russo stepped inside, his cashmere coat worth more than a year of someone else's rent, his presence filling the space like a storm that had just learned to walk on 2 legs. He did not see the booth at first. He was scanning the room with the practiced eye of a man accustomed to reading threats the way other people read menus. Vinny and Sal were behind him, both dressed in suits that cost more than most people made in a month, both carrying the particular weight of men who had learned that violence was sometimes the only language the world understood. Then Giovanni saw her. Valentina Harper lay slumped in the back booth, her left eye swollen purple-black, her throat a landscape of handprints so dark they looked painted on. Blood had dried on her collar in a thin line like a terrible signature. Her breath came in shallow gasps that rattled slightly, the sound of pain made audible. She was trembling, not from cold but from the slow burn of adrenaline wearing off, leaving only the shaking aftermath of terror. Giovanni moved toward her in 4 strides. His lieutenants exchanged glances. They had learned long ago that when the boss moved like that, something fundamental was about to shift. He slid into the booth across from her without asking permission. "Who did this to you?" His voice was low, and that was how you knew it carried the weight of an entire empire pressing down behind every syllable. Like thunder that had learned to whisper. Valentina tried to speak. Her throat produced only a sound like wind through broken glass. She shook her head, hands curling into fists on the table, her whole body rigid with the effort of holding herself together. Giovanni raised his hand. The waitress appeared instantly, fear and obligation moving her faster than any politeness could. "Ice. Water. Cloth," he said, and she moved. He turned back to Valentina. "5 nights ago, you pulled my daughter from a storm drain." You bled for her. You are Valentina Harper. Recognition moved through her like electricity, her eyes widening despite the pain. You are. Giovanni Russo. He said it the way most people would say their name was John. Like it was the most ordinary fact in the world. And now you will tell me who put their hands on you. The ice arrived. Giovanni unwrapped it in cloth and slid it across to her. She pressed it against her eye with a whimper. For a moment, there was only the sound of the diner, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant murmur of the drunk in the corner, a car passing on the street outside, its tires hissing on wet pavement. Marcus Hargrove, she whispered. Each word cost her. Robert's nephew. Vinny's jaw tightened. He knew the name. Knew the uncle too, one of the city's smaller loan sharks, the type who believed fear was a business model and violence was customer service. Sal leaned down and whispered something to Giovanni. The boss did not even glance at him. He was watching Valentina the way a scientist watches something under glass, studying her, understanding her. We need to move, Vinny said quietly. The meeting. Cancel everything. Giovanni's voice never changed pitch. Get Doc Morrison here. Now. Sal stared. In 15 years of working for Giovanni Russo, of watching him make decisions that moved money and bodies and power across the city like chess pieces, he had never seen him redirect his entire evening for a stranger. Boss, the shipment meeting with. I said cancel it. 31 minutes later, Doc Morrison arrived with his black medical bag and his careful hands. He had been the Russo family physician for a decade, had treated wounds that would make normal doctors refuse to ask questions, had learned to work without flinching. He examined Valentina in the booth with professional efficiency, checking her eye, pressing gently on her ribs, studying the purple devastation around her throat. Orbital bone is bruised but not fractured, he said. 3 cracked ribs. Severe contusions on the throat and neck. She needs rest, ice, antibiotics. And she should not be alone for at least 48 hours in case of swelling that restricts her airway. He glanced at Giovanni. Hospital or? My estate, Giovanni said. Dr. Morrison, you will stay with her until morning. Make sure nothing worsens. Valentina tried to protest, her voice emerging as a destroyed whisper. I cannot. I have work. The morning shift. I cannot lose. You are not going anywhere, Giovanni said. It was not cruel. It was fact. The way he might tell her the sun was rising or that water was wet. You do not understand. Her hands were shaking now, the ice slipping from her fingers. I owe money. $22,000. For days until they take everything. My job is, it is all I have to. You are the woman who saved my daughter without knowing who she was. Without asking for anything. That makes you somebody. Giovanni's eyes were storm gray in the diner light, and they held something that made her breath catch despite the pain. I will handle Robert Hargrove. You will stay at my estate until you are healed. Lily has been asking about you every day. They sat in that booth for 90 minutes while the city passed by outside. Valentina told him everything, how her mother's surgery had cost $47,000, how the insurance company had refused to pay, how she had borrowed from Robert Hargrove at 42% interest thinking she could pay it back, how instead she had only been drowning deeper. She told him about the converted closet where she slept in the Chen family penthouse, about the 16-hour days, about the torn college acceptance letter she kept in her pocket, a reminder of the life that was not hers, the future that had been bargained away. She told him about the $2 in her wallet. That was all. $2 in the entire world. I cannot accept charity, she whispered. This is not charity, Giovanni said quietly. This is a debt I owe. At 4 in the morning, in a Coral Gables mansion with windows the size of doors and art on the walls worth more than some houses, Robert Hargrove received a phone call from his nephew. Marcus was panicking, his voice high and scattered. Uncle Robert, there is a problem. Giovanni Russo has the Harper girl. Robert went very still. The phone felt suddenly heavy in his hand. Beside him in bed, Evelyn Blackwell sat up slowly, adjusting her silk pajamas. She was 43, blonde, with the kind of face that had been professionally maintained to look perpetually 30. "Who is Giovanni Russo?" she asked, amusement in her voice. "The most dangerous man in South Florida," Robert said. Evelyn laughed. "Over some waitress? That is absurd. We will move faster. We take her to court tomorrow. Seize her wages, destroy her credibility before he can act." She was already reaching for her phone. "I have Judge Brennan ready to rule in our favor. We have been preparing this for weeks." The sun was rising when Evelyn Blackwell stood on the courthouse steps in a Chanel suit, her expression arranged into careful sympathy. Reporters crowded around her, cameras flashing like small explosions. She spoke about predatory borrowers and irresponsible debtors. She showed falsified receipts on her phone, proving that Valentina had borrowed money for luxury purchases, designer clothes, expensive restaurants. Every word was a lie wrapped in legal language, and every lie was perfectly calculated to destroy. The story was online within an hour. By noon, it was trending. By evening, Valentina Harper's name was synonymous with fraud across every Miami news outlet and social media platform. Her reputation, thin as it already was, had been erased entirely. Meanwhile, in Giovanni Russo's Coral Gables estate, Valentina woke in a guest room that was larger than most apartments. Sunlight was falling through windows that looked out onto gardens where roses bloomed in controlled perfection. The bed beneath her was so soft it felt like sleeping on clouds that had been trained to be obedient. Lily was sitting on the edge of the mattress, holding a stuffed rabbit. "Papa said you are staying with us," the 7-year-old announced. "He said you are the bravest person he ever met." Valentina's throat tightened. Before she could respond, Giovanni appeared in the doorway with a breakfast tray, scrambled eggs, fresh fruit, coffee that smelled like a country she had never been to. He set it on the bedside table with careful movements, each one deliberate, nothing wasted. Lily hugged Valentina gently, careful of her ribs, then skipped out to find her toys. Giovanni sat in the chair by the window, his silhouette framed against the morning light. "Evelyn Blackwell held a press conference," he said. "She is destroying your reputation. The story is everywhere." Valentina closed her eyes. "Then I have already lost." "No." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "You have not. But you need to trust me." She looked at him, this man whose hands had ordered violence, whose decisions moved empires, who was studying her like she was something precious and rare. "Why do you care?" The question came out broken. "I am nobody." Giovanni was silent for a long moment. The sound of the city filtered in through the open window, distant traffic, birds, the ordinary noise of morning. When he spoke, his voice was different. Quieter. Like he was telling her something he had never spoken aloud before. 9 years ago, my first daughter died. 3 days after she was born. I kept her nursery exactly as it was the day she died. I have not been in that room since the funeral." He paused. "When Lily was born, I swore I would protect her from everything. And I failed. She wandered away from her bodyguard during a storm and nearly drowned. You saved her when I could not. You bled for a child who was not yours." He stood, and the morning light caught the scar that ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, a thin line like a permanent reminder of survival. "That is why I care," he said. Valentina felt tears on her face. She did not know that at that exact moment, 3 blocks away in a downtown office, Robert Hargrove and Evelyn Blackwell were filing an emergency court order to drag her into civil court in 72 hours. They did not know that Giovanni Russo was about to declare war. And she did not know that the next 3 days would contain a reckoning so complete, so systematic, that it would remind the entire city why some men were feared, and why protecting those they loved meant dismantling everything that threatened them. The rain began to fall outside, drumming against the windows like a warning nobody was heeding. In the distance, sirens wailed. And Valentina Harper, lying in a bed worth more than a year of her wages, finally began to understand that her life had just changed in ways she could not yet measure. The courthouse hallway smelled of marble polish and fear. Valentina sat on a wooden bench, her borrowed dress hanging loose on her frame, fingers pressed against the folded court summons that had arrived 3 days ago. Her hands would not stop shaking. 48 hours. That was all the time between receiving the papers and standing before a judge who would hear Robert Hargrove's claims that she owed $22,000, that she was a thief, that she was a liar trying to escape legitimate debt by seducing a criminal. She did not know that in his office 2 blocks away, Giovanni Russo was making a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end belonged to federal prosecutor James Morrison, a man Giovanni had saved 13 years ago when Morrison's daughter was kidnapped by a rival family. Morrison owed a debt that transcended law and order. "I need you to listen carefully," Giovanni said, his voice deep and solid like an oath. "I have a case. Wire fraud. Conspiracy. Racketeering. I have every document. Every wire transfer. Every communication between Robert Hargrove and Evelyn Blackwell showing they have destroyed at least 43 victims over 6 years." Morrison listened. He understood what was being offered, not a favor, but a systematic dismantling of a criminal operation hiding behind the law's blind spots. "Send it to me," Morrison said. "I will have warrants drawn by dawn." Giovanni ended the call. He stood in his office overlooking the Miami skyline, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for the sun to rise. Meanwhile, Evelyn Blackwell was preparing her final move. She dressed in white, expensive, pristine, a designer dress worth $3,400, paid for with money stolen from people like Valentina. Her hair was styled perfectly. Her makeup flawless. She had called every news station in South Florida and told them she would be making a statement at Giovanni Russo's estate gate at 6:45 a.m. She arrived with 12 reporters, their cameras rolling, their questions sharp and eager. She stood at the iron gate with its massive stone lions, and she pressed the intercom button. "Valentina Harper," she said, her voice steady and cruel, designed to cut like a blade. "You are hiding behind a criminal to avoid your debts. Come out and face justice like an adult. Stop using this man's money to buy your silence. Show some dignity. Show some courage." The cameras caught everything. The gate. The mansion behind it. The implication that Valentina was a coward, a parasite, a woman using her body to escape consequences. By 8 a.m., the footage had been shared 47,000 times. By noon, 200,000 shares. News anchors were debating whether Giovanni Russo was harboring a fugitive. Social media erupted. Evelyn Blackwell, wife of a city councilman, philanthropist, beloved member of Miami's charitable circuit, was portrayed as a victim, a woman trying to collect what she was owed while being silenced by organized crime. Valentina watched it in Giovanni's study. His home theater system, the size of a small cinema, projected her own face onto a 20-foot screen. Evelyn's words echoed through surround sound speakers worth $78,000. "Stop using this man's money to buy your silence." Giovanni entered quietly. His hand settled on her shoulder, warm, steady, the opposite of her trembling. "She is trying to provoke you," he said. "Do not give her the satisfaction of a reaction." But that night, Valentina could not sleep. She lay in the guest room, a space larger than her old apartment, staring at the ceiling. The rain drummed against the windows. She reached for the small box on the nightstand and removed the torn college acceptance letter, the one that had arrived 8 years ago before everything fell apart. Before her mother's medical bills. Before the surgeries. Before the funeral. Before she had become the kind of person who could not afford to say no to a loan shark's offer. 3:47 a.m. She found herself in Giovanni's garden, walking barefoot through the August rain. Humidity wrapped around her like a suffocating hand. The rain was warm and thick and endless, soaking through the pale nightgown she had borrowed from his guest closet. Thunder cracked overhead, splitting the sky open. Lightning illuminated the gardens, topiary sculptures, marble fountains, flowers that probably cost more than her mother's entire medical debt. Her ribs ached beneath the thin fabric. Her throat still hurt from Robert's nephew's hands. She stood at the garden gate, the one that opened onto the street beyond, and she thought about walking through it. Simply leaving. Disappearing into the city where no one could find her, where she could not hurt anyone anymore, where she would not drag Giovanni Russo deeper into a war he was fighting only because she had pulled his daughter from a storm drain 3 weeks ago. She was so tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of owing. Tired of being invisible, and tired of the thought that maybe invisibility was her only choice left. The rain ran into her eyes, mixing with tears she did not know she was crying. Her body shook, not from cold, but from the weight of understanding that she was about to ruin the only person who had ever truly seen her. Her hand reached for the gate latch. "Miss Valentina." The voice was small and terrified. Valentina turned. Lily stood in the doorway of the house, silhouetted against the warm light from inside, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The child wore pink pajamas with tiny roses. Her feet were bare. She looked impossibly small against the vastness of the estate. "Are you leaving?" Lily asked. The question was simple, but it carried the weight of every abandoned child who had ever watched someone walk away. Valentina's breath caught. She could not move. The rain fell harder, and for a moment, the world contained only this, one broken woman and one terrified child, separated by a garden path. "No, sweetheart," Valentina said. Her voice broke. "I am not leaving." She walked back toward the house. Toward Lily. Away from the gate. And there, in the hallway, drenched and glistening, was Giovanni Russo. His expensive linen shirt clung to his chest. His dark hair was plastered to his face. His eyes burned with something fierce and protective and absolutely unbreakable. He did not ask where she had gone. He did not ask what she had been considering. He simply said, "I will not let them destroy you. Not today. Not ever." 6:32 a.m. the next morning. 12 men in black moved through Robert Hargrove's Coral Gables estate like ghosts. Vinny led them, his footsteps soundless on Italian marble, his jaw set with the precision of a man executing a perfect operation. They had been preparing for 72 hours. Wire transfers, falsified loan documents, communications between Robert and Evelyn proving they had run a systematic fraud operation targeting vulnerable people, immigrants, single mothers, the desperate, the broken. The evidence was overwhelming. Giovanni had given it to Morrison gift-wrapped. At 6:32 a.m. exactly, FBI agents arrived at the front entrance with warrants that spanned 17 pages. They announced themselves through the intercom. Shouting. Professional. Unmistakable. Robert Hargrove stood in his kitchen drinking coffee from a mug that cost $240. When he heard the commotion, he dropped it. It shattered against marble. Liquid spread across the floor like blood. He ran. Made it for steps before agents tackled him, his body slamming against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. His ribs cracked. His breath exploded from his lungs. They forced his hands behind his back and cuffed him while he screamed, actually screamed, begging for mercy that would not come. "I will pay it back," he gasped, tears streaming. "I will fix it, I will fix everything, please." Agent Morrison stood above him, reading his rights in a voice like stone. The evidence was undeniable. The conspiracy was complete. There was no escape. 7:15 a.m., the courthouse parking lot. Evelyn Blackwell emerged from the courthouse restroom and found FBI agents waiting. 6 of them, closing in from every direction. Cameras captured everything, every moment of recognition, every second of her composure shattering. "Evelyn Blackwell," Agent Morrison said, holding up the warrant, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, and extortion affecting at least 43 victims over 6 years." She tried to maintain dignity. Tried to smile. Tried to say something cutting and clever. But her hands shook as they cuffed her. Her designer heels clicked against the pavement, a sharp, desperate sounds, as they led her toward the federal vehicle. Every news camera captured her face, streaked with mascara, mouth open in protest. The socialite. The philanthropist. The woman who had destroyed Valentina's reputation. Led away in handcuffs. By 9 a.m., the story had spread across every news outlet in South Florida. By afternoon, national networks picked it up. By evening, the narrative had completely reversed. Evelyn Blackwell, once the victim demanding justice, was now exposed as a predator. The comments on her social media accounts numbered in the hundreds of thousands, people she had wronged, people who recognized her, people whose lives she had destroyed. For months later, the sentencing came swift and certain. Federal Courthouse. Judge Patricia Hernandez sat elevated above the courtroom, her gavel resting in her hand. Robert Hargrove stood first, handcuffed, hollow-eyed. A man who had terrorized people with violence and debt now faced a vastly different kind of confinement. 40 years, Judge Hernandez said, her voice cutting through the courtroom like ice. Federal prison. No parole eligibility for 30 years. You preyed upon the desperate. You exploited vulnerability for profit. This is not revenge. This is society protecting itself from someone who has demonstrated he cannot live within its rules. Robert collapsed. Guards caught him before he fell. Evelyn Blackwell came next. She wore a beige prison dress, her hair pulled back severely. All the artifice had been stripped away. She looked suddenly ordinary. Suddenly powerless. 40 years, Judge Hernandez said. Federal prison. Asset forfeiture of $4.7 million. Every cent will be distributed to your victims through the restitution fund. Your name, your reputation, your life as you knew it, all of it is finished. Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. She tried to speak. Nothing emerged. In the gallery, Valentina sat beside Giovanni. She watched them lead Robert away first. Then Evelyn. Their footsteps echoing down the corridor. The door closing behind them. The finality of it absolute and complete. Giovanni's hand found hers. He did not speak. He did not need to. The message was clear, she was protected now. Not because she was nobody, but because she had chosen to be somebody. She had chosen to save a child when she had nothing to give. And that choice had mattered more than anyone could have predicted. 6 months later, the yellow cottage sat at the edge of Giovanni's estate like a small miracle, freshly painted, with white shutters and a garden that Valentina had planted herself. Tomatoes, basil, lavender. Things that grew because someone tended them. Things that did not die from neglect. The converted closet where she once slept was gone now, replaced by a real bedroom with windows that faced east toward the sunrise. She had insisted on the cottage, on distance, on boundaries. Giovanni had understood without argument. Respect looked like giving someone space to breathe. That October evening, Giovanni arrived just after sunset, when the sky turned the color of bruised copper. He stood at the cottage door holding something wrapped in brown paper. His shoulders were broader somehow, or perhaps she had simply grown accustomed to the way he filled any room he entered. 2 months of weekly dinners. 3 months of long conversations on the porch. For months of his men pretending not to notice that their boss had become predictable, always leaving by 9, always heading toward the cottage with that particular expression on his face. "I have something for you," he said. His voice was steady, but she could see the slight tension in his jaw. "It took me 9 years to be ready to open it." She led him inside. The cottage smelled like coffee and the lavender soap she made in the small kitchen. He set the package on the table, and she noticed his hand trembled slightly as he unwrapped it. A photograph, encased in a silver frame. A little girl with dark curling hair and Giovanni's eyes, maybe 4 years old, holding a stuffed rabbit. She was laughing at something just beyond the camera's frame. "Sophia," he said. The name broke open in his throat like a wound reopening. She would have been 17 next month. Valentina did not speak. She took his hand and led him out of the cottage, across the estate's dark gardens, toward a house she had never entered. The main residence. His fortress. They climbed stairs that seemed to extend forever, and then he stopped at a closed door painted soft yellow. He could not cross the threshold. His breathing came shallow, rapid. She squeezed his hand and stepped inside first. The nursery was exactly as he had kept it for 9 years. A white crib with pale blue bedding. Mobile with felt birds hanging motionless. Shelves lined with stuffed animals arranged in precise order: rabbit, elephant, giraffe, bear. One small rocking chair in the corner. A window overlooking the garden. Everything frozen in time like a museum of loss. The air itself felt sacred and suffocating. "Tell me about her," Valentina whispered. He stood in the doorway, unable to move further. She liked music. I would sing to her, and she would grab my finger so tight. She was not even 2 when she got sick. Pneumonia. They said it was manageable. They said children recover from this all the time. His voice dropped to something barely audible. She did not. The rain began then, sudden and hard, pattering against the nursery windows. Valentina did not try to fix it. There was no fixing this. She simply held his hand while he cried for the first time in 9 years. His body shook. His shoulders curved inward. When his men had worked for him through his daughter's illness and death, he had not wept once. He had gone silent instead, becoming something carved from stone. But here, in this yellow room with a woman who understood that some wounds never fully heal, he broke open. 10 minutes passed. 20. The rain continued its steady percussion against glass. When his breathing finally steadied, she led him back to the cottage. They sat on her small porch overlooking the garden she had planted. The rain had softened to mist. In the distance, a single car engine rumbled past on the estate's private road. "You saved me," Valentina said quietly, "on the worst night of my life. When I was bleeding in that diner booth, invisible and broken, you saw me." Giovanni turned to her. His eyes were still wet, still red-rimmed from crying. "You saved me first," he said. "The moment you pulled Lily from that storm drain, when you put a child's life above your own safety, you saved me. You showed me that people like you still exist. People who help when they have nothing left to give. I thought that kind of goodness was extinct." She kissed him then, soft and tentative in the cottage doorway. It tasted like rain and coffee and something that felt impossibly like home. 2 years passed in the accumulation of small moments. Valentina graduated from Florida International University with a degree in social work, her acceptance letter, the torn one she had carried like a prayer through the darkest days, framed on the cottage wall. Giovanni and Lily sat in the audience, 3rd row back. When her name was called, she looked into the crowd and found Giovanni already watching her, tears running freely down his face. Not ashamed of them. Not hiding them. Just present with the pride of a man who had learned that love meant celebrating someone else's triumph as fiercely as your own. Robert Hargrove died in federal prison 3 years into his sentence, from complications related to hepatitis. No funeral. No mourning. Evelyn Blackwell remained incarcerated, denied parole 4 times. Marcus Hargrove served his 8 years and was released to a world that would never forget his violence. He worked now at a warehouse in Jacksonville, invisible once more, which seemed fitting. But Valentina did not think about them much anymore. What consumed her instead was the non-profit that bore a name she had chosen with Giovanni's help, the Harbor House. A place for people drowning in predatory debt, learning to swim again. She ran it from a modest office in downtown Miami, funded by Giovanni's foundation, staffed by people who had survived their own financial catastrophes. Volunteers who understood that being trapped looked different for everyone. She spoke at community centers and churches, telling her story without embellishment: the converted closet, the $22,000 debt, the 12-day deadline, the diner at 3 in the morning where everything changed. She told them about the college acceptance letter she had carried like a talisman. She told them that choices matter, even when you make them in the dark. Giovanni stood in the back of every event, quiet and proud, watching her with an expression that had no name in any language. Late one night, months after she had begun living at the main house, not as an employee, but as family, as someone who belonged, Valentina found herself standing in Sophia's nursery. Giovanni slept downstairs. Lily slept in her room. The house was still. She looked at the stuffed animals on the shelves, at the crib that had never held another child, and she made a decision. The next morning, she told him, "I want to donate Sophia's things to the Harbour House. For families who lost children. I want them to have what you kept safe." She watched his face carefully. "But only if you are ready." He was quiet for a very long time. Then, "Yes. I think she would like that. She was always meant to help people." They began the process slowly. Each stuffed animal was photographed, documented, and packaged with care. The crib was donated to a hospital maternity ward. The mobile found its way to a children's therapy office. The rocking chair went to a crisis center where women escaping domestic violence could rock their babies and remember that safety existed somewhere in the world. When the room was finally empty, Giovanni stood in the doorway one last time. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" Valentina asked. "For understanding that holding on and letting go are not opposites. They are the same act, done with love." Late evening, the checkered floor of the diner gleamed under harsh fluorescent light. The same diner where Giovanni had found her broken and bleeding 18 months ago. The same booth in the back where she had collapsed. Now the three of them sat there, Valentina, Giovanni, and Lily, who was 9 years old and had his dark eyes and her mother's tenacity. Lily stirred sugar into her hot chocolate, watching the spiral dissolve. "Papa, how did you know Miss Valentina was special?" She always called her Miss Valentina still, though Valentina had gently offered other names. The girl's loyalty to formal respect was touching and stubborn. Giovanni looked at his daughter, then at Valentina, then back at Lily. Because she helped someone who needed her, even when she had nothing left to give. She saw a child in danger and did not think about whether she was safe or if it was her responsibility. She just moved. That is how you know someone is worth keeping. That is how you know someone understands what matters. Lily considered this with the gravity of someone much older than 9. Outside, rain had begun to fall again, steady, patient rain that made the neon signs on the street blur into watercolor abstracts. The diner smelled like it always did, coffee, grease, the ghost of 1,000 meals cooked on a griddle that never rested. Valentina reached across the table and took both their hands. "I thought I was nobody," she said quietly. "A live-in nanny in a converted closet, drowning in debt, invisible to everyone around me. But one choice, one moment of helping a child I did not know, changed everything. Not because I wanted a reward or expected salvation. Because it was the right thing to do. And somehow, that choice brought me here, to a man who reminds me every day that I matter, to a little girl who fills my life with purpose, to a future I never dared imagine." Giovanni's thumb traced circles on her hand. Lily smiled, the kind of smile that only children can produce, completely unself-conscious, completely certain of joy. "The truth that changed my life was this: we choose every single day between fear and trust, between closing ourselves off and opening our hearts. Choose to open. You never know who is waiting on the other side." The rain continued its gentle percussion against the windows. Inside the diner, warmth glowed. 3 people sat together in the back booth, holding hands across the checkered table, and nobody there was invisible anymore. How did this story make you feel? Please leave a comment below and share what is in your heart. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming tomorrow. Share this with someone who needs to hear it.